The October rain falls like bullets on Brooklyn asphalt as Elena Moretti, a 25-year-old trauma nurse, finishes her 12-hour shift at Mercy General Hospital. Hiding from the life she left behind 6 years ago when she fled an arranged marriage with the Castellano family, she has mastered the art of invisibility. The sound of gunfire tears through the night. Against every instinct of self-preservation, Elena investigates and finds Dante Romano, 32, shot and bleeding in an alley. Despite recognizing the obvious signs of his connection to organized crime, the expensive suit, custom shoulder holster, and commanding presence even while wounded, she cannot leave him to die. Elena brings Dante to her apartment, treating his gunshot wound with professional efficiency while maintaining emotional distance. But Dante is observant, noticing details that reveal Elena's own connection to his world: her fluent Italian, her lack of panic around weapons, her reinforced apartment door. As she saves his life in her kitchen, both sense that this encounter will irrevocably change everything they've carefully built to protect themselves. The chapter establishes the dangerous chemistry between them: Elena's fierce independence and compassion, Dante's lethal authority tempered by unexpected vulnerability, and the collision of two people desperately trying to escape their pasts while being pulled inexorably back into the underworld. Morning arrives with complications. Dante's condition is stable, but Elena discovers the extent of the danger she's invited into her life when she recognizes his full name: Dante Romano, head of one of New York's most powerful crime families. Her carefully constructed anonymity is threatened by the mere presence of such a high-profile criminal in her home. Dante insists on repaying his debt, a concept deeply rooted in Mafia tradition that Elena wants no part of. Their argument reveals more about both characters: Elena's traumatic past with the Moretti family, who arranged her marriage to consolidate power with the Castellanos, and Dante's complex relationship with honor and obligation in a world where both are currencies more valuable than money. Before Dante leaves, he extracts Elena's phone number, promising protection she doesn't want. But his instincts prove correct. Within days, word reaches the Moretti family that Elena has been found. Her uncle, still angry about the dishonor she brought by refusing the arranged marriage, sends men to bring her home for punishment. When Elena's apartment is broken into, she calls the one person who has the power to intervene. Dante arrives with his men, dispersing the Moretti enforcers with lethal efficiency. But the price of his protection is steep. Elena must accept his help, which means accepting a connection to the world she escaped. The chapter deepens their relationship while raising the stakes, showing how Dante's world operates with brutal efficiency and how Elena's past refuses to stay buried. It explores themes of loyalty, honor, and the question of whether anyone can truly escape their bloodline. The black SUV idled outside Mercy General Hospital for the third consecutive day, its tinted windows reflecting the gray November sky like obsidian mirrors. Elena pushed through the emergency room doors, exhaustion etched into every line of her face after another brutal 12-hour shift, and felt the weight of those watching eyes settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. She'd saved 4 lives tonight: a stabbing victim, 2 overdoses, and a child with sepsis, but the victories felt hollow when she couldn't even walk to her car without armed escorts. Marcus and Tony emerged from the vehicle with practiced efficiency, their expensive suits and vigilant postures marking them as distinctly different from the neighborhood regulars who lingered outside the hospital. Marcus was older, maybe 45, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of steady competence that came from decades in Dante's organization. Tony was younger, mid-20s, still eager to prove himself, but smart enough to follow Marcus's lead without question. "Miss Moretti," Marcus greeted her with professional courtesy, opening the rear door of the SUV. It wasn't a request. Eleanor's jaw tightened with frustration that had been building for a week since Dante's men had become her constant shadows. Her co-workers whispered in break rooms, their speculations ranging from witness protection to sugar baby arrangements with a wealthy businessman. Nobody guessed the truth, that she'd saved a mafia boss's life and now found herself entangled in obligations she never wanted. "I can take the subway," Elena said, though she made no move toward the station. They'd had this conversation before, and she always lost. "Mr. Romano would prefer you didn't," Marcus replied, his tone gentle but inflexible. "The Castellanos have eyes everywhere, Miss Moretti. The subway isn't safe." The mention of the Castellano family sent ice through Elena's veins. 6 years she'd hidden from them. 6 years of careful anonymity, destroyed in a single rainy night. She slid into the SUV without further protest, settling into leather seats that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. The drive to Manhattan took 40 minutes through traffic-choked streets, giving Elena time to stew in her resentment. She'd built a life on her own terms, modest, anonymous, but hers. Now that life was unraveling, pulled apart by forces she'd fled years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd refused to be controlled by her family's arrangements, only to find herself controlled by a different mafia boss's protection. Dante's restaurant, Impero, occupied a corner building in Tribeca, with floor-to-ceiling windows that glowed warm and inviting against the darkening sky. Elena had researched it during her lunch break, a legitimate business, critically acclaimed, frequented by celebrities and politicians who probably had no idea about the real empire it fronted. The kind of respectable veneer that made organized crime palatable to a city that preferred not to acknowledge its existence. Marcus escorted her through the main dining room, where elegant patrons barely glanced up from their truffle risotto and aged steaks. They passed through a door marked "Private" into a hallway lined with original artwork. Not prints, Eleanor noted, but actual paintings worth more than most people earned in a year. The deeper they went, the more the restaurant's polished facade gave way to something raw, more honest about what it really was. Dante's office occupied the building's top floor, a sprawling space with exposed brick walls, modern furnishings, and a view of lower Manhattan that probably added 6 figures to the property value. He stood at the window with his back to the door, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and clipped in rapid Italian that Elena understood perfectly despite wishing she didn't. "Handle it," Dante said into the phone, his tone brooking no argument. "I don't care about his excuses. The shipment was compromised, which means we have a leak. Find it, plug it, and make sure everyone understands what happens when they're careless." He ended the call and turned, his expression softening marginally when he saw Elena. 2 weeks had passed since that rainy night, and his wound was healing well. She'd checked it herself 3 days ago when he'd insisted she examine it at his penthouse. He moved with only slight stiffness now, the kind most people wouldn't notice, but that told Elena his recovery was progressing exactly as it should. "You wanted to see me?" Elena said, not bothering with pleasantries. Anger had been simmering in her chest for days, fed by every lost moment of privacy, every whispered speculation at work. "You're furious," Dante observed, gesturing toward the leather chairs arranged near his desk. "Sit. We should talk." "I don't want to sit," Elena snapped, her professional composure finally cracking under the pressure of exhaustion and frustration. "I want my life back. I want to walk to work without armed guards. I want my co-workers to stop looking at me like I'm some mafia mistress. I want you to acknowledge that I saved your life, not sold you my freedom." Dante's dark eyes studied her with that unsettling intensity she'd come to recognize. The way he catalogued everything, missing nothing, processing information with the cold efficiency of someone who'd survived by reading people better than they read themselves. He moved to a bar cart in the corner, poured 2 glasses of amber liquid that Elena suspected cost more per ounce than her hourly wage. "Sit," he repeated, this time with less command and more request. "Please." The please surprised her enough that Elena found herself sinking into the chair, accepting the glass he offered. The whiskey burned smooth and expensive down her throat, nothing like the cheap bourbon she occasionally bought for rough nights. "Your co-workers think you're my mistress?" Dante asked, something that might have been amusement flickering in his expression. "Among other theories," Elena said bitterly. "Witness protection, sugar baby, trophy girlfriend. Nobody's guessed the truth because the truth is insane. That I pulled a bullet out of a crime boss in my kitchen and now can't escape the consequences." Dante settled into the chair across from her, his movements still careful of his healing wound. "The Castellanos put a price on information about you 3 days ago," he said, his tone matter-of-fact about something that made Elena's blood run cold. $50,000 to anyone who can confirm your location and routines. "They want you, Elena. Not to kill. Not yet. They want to use you to get to the Morettis and to get to me." The glass trembled slightly in Elena's hand. $50,000 was enough to tempt anyone in her neighborhood, where poverty made people desperate and loyalty was a luxury most couldn't afford. "Why?" she managed to ask, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Because you were promised to them and you ran," Dante explained, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, close enough that Elena could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive that probably had an Italian name she'd never pronounce correctly. Because that broken engagement collapsed an alliance between the Castellanos and Morettis that took 3 years to negotiate. Because your uncle lost face when his niece chose poverty over power, and the Castellanos lost a strategic marriage that would have given them access to Moretti territory. "That was 6 years ago," Elena protested, though she knew better than anyone that the Mafia's memory was long and its grudges eternal. 6 years during which you disappeared completely," Dante said. "Changed your name legally, moved boroughs, cut all contact with your family. You were good at hiding, Elena. Better than most. But then you saved my life, and I started asking questions, quietly at first, through channels that should have been secure. But information has a way of spreading in our world, especially when it's valuable." Elena drained her whiskey in one burning swallow, needing the artificial courage it provided. "So what now? I'm bait in some territorial dispute between crime families? That's what my life has become?" "No," Dante said firmly. "You're under my protection, which means you're untouchable. The Castellanos know this. Your uncle knows this. But knowledge doesn't always prevent stupidity, which is why Marcus and Tony will continue to shadow you until the situation stabilizes." "And when will that be?" Elena demanded. "Days? Weeks? Never?" Dante's expression darkened in a way that made Elena remember exactly who she was talking to. Not the wounded man she'd treated in her kitchen, but the head of one of New York's most powerful crime families. "When I've made it clear enough that touching you means war," he said quietly. "When the cost of revenge outweighs the satisfaction." They sat in charged silence, the city sprawling below them through windows that framed Manhattan like a painting of civilization built on calculated violence. Elena thought of her mother, who'd spent 30 years married to a Mafia capo, withering under the weight of a life she'd never chosen. She thought of the girl she'd been at 19, terrified and desperate as she ran from a future that felt like a prison sentence. "Tell me about him," Dante said suddenly. "The man they wanted you to marry." Elena's hands clenched around the empty glass. "Why?" "Because I want to understand what you ran from," Dante replied. "Because I want to know what scared you enough to choose poverty over power." For a long moment, Elena considered refusing, keeping that pain locked away where it had festered for 6 years. But something in Dante's expression, genuine curiosity without judgment, made her speak. "His name was Marco Castellano," she began, her voice steady despite the memories rising like ghosts. "Nephew to the family boss, heir apparent. 20 years older than me. They introduced us at my 19th birthday party, like I was a business acquisition they were showing off to a potential buyer." She paused, gathering the fractured pieces of memory. "He was polite at first, brought flowers, took me to expensive restaurants, played the role of devoted suitor. But I saw how he treated waiters, how he spoke to women he didn't need to impress. I saw the bruises on his last girlfriend's arms when she came to beg my uncle to end the engagement. They sent her away with money and threats. Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I told my uncle I wouldn't marry him, Elena continued. I was still naive enough to think I had a choice. That family meant something besides business arrangements and strategic alliances. My uncle laughed, said I was being dramatic, that all men had tempers, that I'd learned to manage Marco like my mother had learned to manage my father. When I refused again, they locked me in my room, said I'd stay there until I came to my senses. How did you escape? Dante asked quietly. A ghost of a smile touched Elena's lips, bitter but proud. Third-floor window, bedsheets tied together like some ridiculous movie. Broke my ankle in the fall but didn't stop running. I had money saved, birthday gifts, confirmation money, everything I'd been squirreling away since I was 12, because some part of me always knew I'd need to run eventually. Changed my name, moved to Brooklyn, enrolled in nursing school under my new identity. And they never found you, Dante said, something like admiration coloring his tone. Not until you started asking questions, Elena replied, meeting his eyes directly. So forgive me if I'm not grateful for your protection when your curiosity is what destroyed my safety in the first place. The accusation hung between them, sharp and undeniable. Dante stood, moving to the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Elena understand why men followed his orders without question. You're right, he said. My questions exposed you. But Elena, you exposed yourself the moment you saved my life. The Morettis have informants everywhere, including the hospital. Someone saw you bring a wounded man to your apartment. Someone talked. It would have reached them eventually, with or without my involvement. Elena wanted to argue, but the truth of his words settled heavy in her chest. In saving Dante, she'd stepped out of the shadows she'd carefully maintained for 6 years. There was no going back to invisibility, no matter how much she wished otherwise. I grew up in this world too, Dante said, still facing the window. Not born into it like you, but pulled in young enough that I don't remember anything else. My father ran the docks, controlled half the shipping that came through New York. He taught me the business the same way some fathers teach their sons baseball, with brutal efficiency and high expectations. He turned back to face her, and Elena saw something in his expression she'd never expected: vulnerability. When I was 25, a rival family put a bomb in his car. He survived for 3 days in the hospital, long enough to make me promise I'd take over, that I'd protect the family, that I'd be stronger than he was. Then he died, and I became this. Dante gestured at himself, at the office, at the empire contained within those walls and spread throughout the city. I never chose this, Elena. I was born into it, raised for it, trapped by it, just like you were. The difference is, I didn't have the courage to run. The confession shifted something in the room's atmosphere, transforming their confrontation into something more complicated. Elena studied him, this dangerous, powerful man who'd just admitted to the same cage she'd escaped. You could walk away now, she said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew their impossibility. Dante's laugh was sharp and humorless. Could I? 300 families depend on my businesses for their income. 50 men work directly under my protection. I have alliances with families in Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia. What happens to all of them if I walk away? Who takes over? Someone better, or someone who'll turn my territory into a war zone? He moved closer, and Elena's breath caught at the intensity in his dark eyes. I'm not looking for your pity, he continued. I'm explaining why I understand what you ran from, and why I'll protect you from ever being dragged back into it. Not because I owe you my life, though I do, but because I see myself in you, the person I might have been if I'd been brave enough to choose differently. I'm not brave, Elena whispered. I was terrified. I'm still terrified. Bravery is being terrified and running anyway, Dante replied. The moment stretched between them, charged with understanding and something Elena refused to name. She stood, needing distance before she did something foolish, like reaching for him, seeking comfort in the arms of a man who represented everything she'd fought to escape. "I should go," she said. "Stay," Dante countered. "Have dinner with me. Not as the man you saved or the boss who's protecting you, just as someone who understands what it's like to be trapped by blood and legacy." Elena knew she should refuse, should maintain the boundaries that were already blurring dangerously. But exhaustion and loneliness and the strange pull she felt toward this complicated, dangerous man made her nod. They ate in his office, pasta that Dante's chef prepared with the kind of casual excellence that spoke to years of training, wine that tasted like liquid sunlight, and conversation that ranged from books to childhood memories to carefully neutral topics that avoided the violence underlying their worlds. For a few hours, Elena almost forgot who they were, what they represented, the impossibility of anything real existing between them. But reality returned when Marcus knocked to announce that Elena's apartment building had been under surveillance earlier. Unmarked car, 2 men, watching for 4 hours before the police ran them off. The reminder crashed over them like cold water, destroying the fragile illusion of normalcy. "You'll stay at my penthouse tonight," Dante said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Elena opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Fighting for independence was one thing, being stupid about actual threats was another. She nodded, hating how easily she capitulated, hating more how safe she felt under Dante's protection. As Marcus drove them to Dante's building, a glass tower in the financial district that screamed wealth and power, Elena stared out at the city lights and wondered how she'd ended up here. 2 weeks ago she'd been invisible, safe in her anonymity. Now she was living in a Mafia boss's penthouse, protected by armed guards, pulled inexorably back toward the world she'd sworn to leave behind. But as Dante's hand briefly covered hers in the darkness of the car, warm and solid and strangely comforting, Elena acknowledged the terrifying truth. She wasn't sure she wanted to escape anymore. Elena woke to the sound of Dante's phone ringing at 3 in the morning, his clipped Italian filling the darkness of the penthouse guest room, where she'd spent 3 increasingly surreal nights. She'd learned to recognize the particular edge in his voice that meant crisis, sharper than irritation, colder than anger, carrying the weight of command that sent men into danger without hesitation. By the time she'd pulled on clothes and emerged into the main living area, Dante was already dressed, surrounded by men whose faces she'd started to recognize. Marcus stood nearest, a tablet displaying what looked like security footage. Even from across the room, Elena could see flames. "When?" Dante demanded, his eyes fixed on the screen. 40 minutes ago, Marcus replied. "The warehouse on Delancey. They used accelerant. Went up fast. We got everyone out, but the shipment's gone, and the building's a total loss." "Casualties?" The question came out flat, emotionless, but Elena saw Dante's hands clench at his sides. 2 men with smoke inhalation. Sal's got burns on his hands from pulling Joey out. They're at Lenox Hill now. Something in Elena's chest tightened at the mention of injuries. Sal was the young one, barely 23, who'd started nodding respectfully at her when she crossed paths with Dante's men. Joey was older, with a wife and 3 kids, whose photos he'd shown her while standing guard outside Dante's office. "I'm going to the hospital," Elena said, not asking permission. Every man in the room turned to stare at her. Dante's expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his dark eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. "It's not safe," he said. "Then send guards," Elena replied, already moving toward where she'd left her bag. "But I'm not sitting here doing nothing while people are hurt. I'm a nurse, Dante. This is what I do." For a long moment he studied her, and Elena could practically see him weighing options, assessing risks. Then he nodded to Marcus. "Take her. Full security detail." And Elena, he waited until she met his eyes. "Thank you." The hospital was chaos. Burn victims always were, their pain visceral and impossible to ignore. But Elena had trained for this, spent 6 years in emergency rooms where crisis was just another Tuesday. She found Sal first, his hands wrapped in temporary bandages, his face streaked with soot and tears he was trying to hide. "Miss Moretti," he said, shock and embarrassment warring in his expression. "You don't need to—" "I'm fine, they said I'm fine." "Let me see," Elena said gently, already unwrapping the bandages with practiced efficiency. The burns were second degree, painful but manageable, the kind that would heal if properly cared for. She worked quietly, cleaning and redressing the wounds, while Sal tried not to wince, his youth showing through the tough guy facade he usually maintained. "Joey?" Elena asked as she secured the new bandages. "Down the hall. They've got him sedated. Smoke inhalation was pretty bad." Sal's voice cracked slightly. "He went back in for the files, the ones Mr. Romano said were important. I tried to stop him, but Joey's stubborn." Elena found Joey in intensive care, unconscious but stable, machines monitoring his oxygen levels, while his body worked to expel the toxins from his lungs. His wife sat beside the bed, holding his hand, her face a mask of exhausted fear that Eleanor recognized from hundreds of hospital vigils. "Mrs. Caruso?" Elena approached carefully, keeping her voice soft. "I'm Elena. I work with your husband sometimes. The doctors are taking good care of him. The ventilator is just to help his lungs rest while they heal." The woman's eyes, red from crying, fixed on Elena with desperate hope. "He's going to be okay? You're sure?" Elena couldn't promise that. She was a nurse, not a fortune-teller, and she knew too well how quickly things could turn. But she also knew what this woman needed to hear. "The doctors are optimistic," she said, which was true. "He's strong, and he got help quickly. Those are good signs." She stayed with Mrs. Caruso for an hour, explaining medical terminology, fetching coffee, offering the kind of quiet support that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with humanity. When she finally emerged into the hallway, she found Dante waiting, his back against the wall, exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. "You didn't have to come," Elena said, though warmth spread through her chest at the sight of him. "Yes, I did," Dante replied. "Joey's one of mine. They're all mine." He gestured toward the waiting room where Sal sat with 3 other men, all bearing signs of the night's violence. "You didn't have to come either, but you did.